As I sat at the park with my grandson, surrounded by the fresh greenery and vibrant colours of spring, we watched the lively scene unfold around us. The park buzzed with the sounds of children playing, their laughter echoing through the trees. The sun shone warmly, casting a pleasant glow. Suddenly, our attention was caught as a basketball began rolling down the court on its own, scaring us both. My grandson, startled, said, "It must be the wind. Ghosts don't exist." Grandma gave a knowing smile, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "Don't be so sure about that," she replied softly. The grandson looked at her, curiosity piqued. "What do you mean, Grandma?" "Let me tell you about something that happened to me, your mother and your aunt over 30 years ago before you were born. In fact," she said, leaning in closer, "I was about your age at the time." The grandson, sensing a story unlike any other, leaned in too, his eyes wide with anticipation. "Oh yes, this will be a good one. Please tell me more." "I remember it like it was yesterday," Grandma began, her voice taking on a distant, almost ethereal quality. "Your grandfather and I had just gone through a divorce, and I'd started a new job. Alice was 7 years old, and Sarah, your aunt, was about 3. We had been living in a rundown apartment filled with roaches and noisy neighbours fighting all the time for over a year. I wanted so badly to find a home with a yard. One day, while driving through a neighbourhood I liked, I saw a sign that said, "Lease purchase $1,000 per month." I got so excited that I called as soon as I got home. You see, this was before cell phones. It was a small, nondescript 2-bedroom, 1-bath house with about 1,000 square feet. But it was a house, not an apartment, and it had a yard. I asked if I could see it, but the homeowner was too busy and said there was a tenant living there who didn't want to show it. He gave me the tenant's number, though, and we arranged to see it on Saturday at 10 a.m. I brought your mother with me. She was about 7 years old, and just as excited as I was. The grandmother's voice grew softer, more deliberate. We had to knock several times before the tenant opened the door. When we walked in, we were hit with the stench of pot and cigarette smoke. Through a crack in the door, I saw some very graphic images on the big screen TV. I was mortified that I had brought Alice. I covered her eyes and asked the tenant to turn off the TV. We walked through the house quickly. It was filthy and smelled terrible, but it had good bones and a lot of potential. The tenant was a scrawny, unwashed man, who later I found out was a minister who had just been fired from a local church. I couldn't imagine living there after him. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, then continued. I forgot about the house until a few months later when our apartment had a water leak. By the time maintenance fixed it, mold had started growing in the walls, and the smell was unbearable. We needed to move quickly. I called the landlord of the Penrose house again to see if it was still available. It was, so I told him I would take it, and he promised me the tenant would be out on the 1st. The grandson's eyes were wide with wonder. "How on earth did you do all this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Grandma's eyes gleamed with a mix of pride and something deeper, something darker. "Fear is a great motivator," she said, her voice low and steady. "Coupled with hope and faith, you can conquer just about anything." He laughed nervously. "Grandma, you know I'm agnostic." She smiled, a knowing smile that seemed to see right through him. "Honey, all you need is the faith of a mustard seed." The grandson, now fully enthralled, said, "Okay, you've got to tell me what happens next." Grandma's expression grew serious. "Well," she said, "on the day we were supposed to move in, we arrived at the Penrose house and found the tenant still there, clearly on drugs and with nothing packed. I was angry and worried because we had nowhere else to go. I called the landlord, but he refused to come over. So, with the help of my mother, the girls' babysitters, and 2 men we hired from a local street corner for $100 each, we managed to move the tenant out in 3 hours with time left. We painted the interior of the house and moved our furniture which had been sitting on the front lawn inside. Before leaving, the ex-tenant warned me that something wasn't right about the house. I shrugged it off, thinking he was just crazy. Later I found out he had been a minister at a local church. The next few months went smoothly. Grandma's voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. But by spring or early summer, strange things started to happen. The landlord called once, asking if anything unusual had happened in the house, but he wouldn't tell me what he meant. Then one weekend, Sarah and I were playing around the back patio French doors. The door on the right was always locked. We were chasing each other, giggling, when suddenly the door locked with Sarah inside and me outside. I panicked. The door was locked, and I couldn't get in, just as I was about to give up. The right door, the one that was always locked, opened by itself. I grabbed Sarah and went inside, knowing something strange had just happened. The grandson's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding in his chest. "Grandma, what happened next?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Sarah started coming home from her dad's with nosebleeds and stomach pains," Grandma continued, her voice now a hushed tone that seemed to make the air around them colder. "Then there was an unexplained fire in the attic. One night I heard a loud thump and found our large water bottle on the floor, as if someone had stepped on it. It had been on the countertop. Just then, the phone rang. It was exactly midnight, and the caller ID showed our own home number. No one was there. Alice came in, and as she did, the refrigerator started spraying out ice. Every hair on my arm stood up. I grabbed her and Sarah, and we all slept in my bed that night with the light on." Grandma sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to echo with the weight of years of secrets. I started walking through the house, threatening the ghost, saying that once my lease purchase was over, I would have the house bulldozed. Nothing major happened for the next 4 months. My lease purchase was up, and it was time to buy. I put a "for sale by owner" sign in the front yard. That night, a local builder called me and offered to buy the house for $10,000 above my asking price. He bulldozed it the very next day. The grandson sat in stunned silence, the park's cheerful noises now seeming distant and surreal. He looked at his grandmother with newfound respect for all she had been through, yet also realizing that sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't see. The tale hung in the air like a cold mist, leaving the grandson to ponder the unseen forces that might lurk in the shadows of even the most ordinary places.